Even though I love decorating with neutral colors for the holidays, I love to have pops of other colors as well. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Jess. Today I have 3 projects that are more traditional with the red and green colors of Christmas. Alright everyone, let's get started. For the first project, I had this leftover piece from a wire wreath from a project that I had made a few weeks ago. It was an 18-inch wire wreath, and I made a moon-shaped wreath, so I needed to cut 2 sections out of the wreath form. So I held on to it because I knew I could make something out of that as well. And I thought it was the perfect shape to make a swag, so I decided to make a Christmas swag with it. And I wanted to cover up the wire a little bit, so I'm just using a roll of this Christmas garland from the Dollar Tree, and I'm wrapping it from one end of the wire form to the other. Now the great thing about this swag is I'm not going to use any hot glue on it, and it comes together really quick and easy. Next, I dug through my floral stash and I picked out some picks that I really liked. Now when I go shopping, I usually look for flower picks that kind of have more than one thing on them. So you can see these ones have pine cones, they have some of those cotton buds, there's some flowers, there's some berries, and I just think that makes it a lot easier whenever you're creating an arrangement or a wreath. They kind of already have the things mixed together for you. So I only needed 4 picks total for this swag. So I started with 2 of the picks that I wanted to be my base layer, and I kind of lined the stems up and I gave them a little bend so that it kind of mimicked the shape of the swag. And originally I was just going to use floral wire to attach these to the little wreath form, but then I remembered I had this pack of zip ties and I thought that would make it a lot easier. So I started out by zip tying the 2 picks together that I was going to use as my base layer, and then I zip tied together the 2 other floral picks that I had picked out that were going to go on top of that one. Now I just needed to zip tie the 2 bundles of picks onto the wreath form, and because this was getting a little bit thicker and a little bit bigger, I decided to use 2 zip ties, and I just kind of put them on the center of the 2 picks. As I was putting this together, I was thinking this would be a really great thing to make if you set up at craft fairs, because out of one 18-inch wreath form, you could probably cut it into about 3 sections. So you could make 3 swags from one form. And even though I used 4 picks, they were from the Dollar Tree, so it was only $4 worth of flowers that I used on this swag. Next, I wanted to create a little bow for in the center of my swag, and I learned how to make bows from watching Olivia at Olivia's Romantic Home, so I'll be sure to link her channel in the description box. But I started out by measuring out about how wide I wanted my bow to be for the first layer, and I think I measured it at around 8 inches, and I just looped it over on itself until I had 3 loops on each side, and that's going to be the first layer. And I'm using ribbon that is about 1.5 inches wide because this swag is a little bit smaller. You can see the 3 loops there on one side. So once you have the 3 loops on each side, that's when you can cut off the end. And then for the second layer of ribbon for my bow, I'm using the same width of ribbon, but just in a solid red color. And I wanted this layer to be just slightly smaller than the first one. So instead of laying it out at 8 inches, I laid it out at the 6-inch mark on my ruler, and then I just repeated the process where I looped it over on itself until I had 3 loops on each side. I didn't measure it, but I did cut 2 strips out of each ribbon to act as the tails for my bow. I'm gonna guess that each strip was probably between 20 and 24 inches long. The next step is to take the little bundles of ribbon loops and fold them in half, and because this ribbon is wired, it makes it a lot easier to do all of these steps because the wire kind of keeps everything in place. If you didn't have the wire in there, I think the ribbon would just kind of be flopping all over the place. So once you find the center, you're just going to cut a little notch about 1/4 inch in from the outside, and you're going to do that to both sides. And I did cut notches in both sets of ribbon loops and in both ribbons that I had cut as tails as well. And I've seen people make bows where they skip this step. They don't cut the notches in, and it seems like their bows come out just as nice, but for me it's just a little bit easier to work with if I have those notches in place. So now I just need to stack everything up. So I started with my 2 tails, and then the larger bundle of ribbon loops, and then the smaller bundle of ribbon loops. And then I made sure that all of the notches were lined up on both sides, and I'm using another zip tie here, but you could use floral wire, or you could even use a pipe cleaner, or just another piece of ribbon or some jute twine. Anything you want to fasten in the center of the bow will work. And I always like to kind of pre-scrunch my ribbons together, so you can see I kind of like scrunched them up in the center a little bit so they were almost accordion pleated, but it wasn't perfect, and that's okay. It just kind of gives the ribbons a start. And then I made sure that that zip tie was inside all of the notches on all of the ribbons before I tightened it up. So the last steps for creating the bow are just to fluff out all of the loops and then cut all of the ribbon tails into dovetails. Now with the wired ribbon, because we kind of smashed it flat, that means that that wire is kind of kinked on the ends of the loops. So to get a nice big fluffy bow, whenever you're pulling the loops out, you want to make sure that you flatten out that wire too, so that it doesn't have a crease in it anymore. You can see how it kind of puffed it out and made it look rounded once I flattened out those creases. And I don't know about you, but I could mess with bows all day long. Like, I feel like I fluff it once and then I fluff it again, and then I add it to something and I fluff it again. It's just like a never-ending cycle, but at some point you just have to stop. And with this bow, because I was adding a little decorative element to the center of it, I didn't bother covering up that zip tie. But if you're just going to make a plain bow with nothing in the center, you might want to run a little piece of ribbon around the center just to make sure you don't see the zip tie or pipe cleaner or whatever it is you used for the center. And also, to make an even bigger, fluffier bow, you could add a 3rd layer of ribbons if you wanted to cut another set of those ribbon loops. You just want to make sure that you decrease the size of the ribbon loops by another inch or 2. So since I started with 8 inches in length on the first layer and then 6 inches, if I were going to create a 3rd layer to this one, I would probably just loop it around 4 inches. Once I got done with the first fluffing of the bow, I took another zip tie and I ran it around through the center, and then that's what I used to attach it to the center of the swag. And when you're fluffing out your bow, because I used a zip tie in the center and it was pretty sturdy, you can really pull on those loops. So make sure that you don't have to be too careful with it. Like, it's pretty sturdy, so you can really pull apart those loops and really get them spread out and fluffed out how you like them. Another thing I like to do with my ribbon tails is sometimes, like on the red ones there, you can see I just kind of folded them so they had a mountain and valley shape, but on this black and white striped one, I kind of corkscrewed it up a little bit, and then that way it kind of gave it a different texture, so that the red tails kind of went in one direction and then the black and white tails kind of went in another direction. Now you could definitely stop here. I think this swag looks really pretty with just the bow in the center, but I decided to make mine just a little bit more fun and whimsical. So I took this little snowman ornament that I found from the Dollar Tree, and it's just a fabric. So to be able to attach it to my swag, I decided to cut 2 little notches in the back going vertically, and then that way I could kind of fish my zip tie through those 2 notches, and then I would have something to attach it to the swag with. I found these cute little treat sacks at the Dollar Tree this year. My store had 2 different designs. It had these little Christmas tree ones, and then it had another one that had sort of a red snowflake ornament in the center. And I knew I wanted to create some kind of stuffed tree out of this Christmas tree one. So I started by just cutting the drawstring loops out of the bag, and then I don't have a seam ripper, so I just used a pair of scissors and I kind of cut the threads that were holding the 2 sides of the bag together. and it came apart pretty easily actually. Like once I started snipping those threads a little bit, it was pretty easy just to kind of pull apart both sides of the bag. The only reason that I pulled apart the two sides of the bags is because I wanted there to be a little bit of excess material along the bottom, because you can see that tree kind of went the whole way down to where the bag was folded, and I needed just a little bit of extra material. So I have both pieces of the bag laid out on my cutting mat here, and I'm just using my rotary cutter and my ruler to kind of cut it into a triangle shape. That way it kind of mimicked the tree shape, but it wasn't exactly perfect because the way the size of the bag went, it kind of gave it a flat top rather than coming to a point on the top, which was okay. I didn't mind that. Now, if you have a sewing machine, this would probably be a lot easier to just sew, but I don't have one, so I'm just using hot glue, and I ran it along the edge of both of the bags. And I did put my silicone mat down because this fabric is kind of thin, and I was afraid that the hot glue would kind of seep out between the two layers. And I ran the hot glue down pretty close to the edge, but not all the way to the edge, because I knew I wanted to be able to kind of fray the edges a little bit. So after I had all of the glue in place, then I just went through and I pulled out some of the extra strings that were around all four edges of this Christmas tree, just to give it more of a frayed look. And also at the bottom here, I didn't run the hot glue the whole way across. I left about a 2.5 inch gap open in the middle so that I would have a little pocket open so that I could add my stuffing. So do you have a big bag of old pillow stuffing in your craft room? Because I do. Every time I'm getting rid of a pillow, I usually end up keeping some of the stuffing out of it for projects like this. If I'm actually making a pillow to give to somebody or for us to use, I use new stuffing, but for little projects like this, I don't mind using old stuffing. Give me a big thumbs up if you got a big bag of stuffing in your craft room. Oh, and by the way, a nice little tip, the Dollar Tree sells these extra large VacuSeal bags that you kind of roll up to squeeze all the air out of. So that's what I keep my pillow stuffing in. I just stuff it into that bag and roll it up, and it squeezes all the air out, and then it lays flatter so that it doesn't take up as much room. So once I had enough stuffing in there that I was happy with how fluffy it was, I realized that I did not stain the stick that I was going to put in there. So I took one of these 12-inch dowel rods from the Dollar Tree, and I just gave it a quick wipe down with some of the antique wax by Waverly. Then I put the dowel rod inside the stuffed Christmas tree, and I ran it the whole way up to the top, and then to secure everything in place, I just ran a little bit more hot glue around the bottom where that opening is and around that dowel rod, and I kind of flattened it out and pressed it out so that it secured everything in place. For the base of my tree, I took one of these little wooden box drawer sets from the Dollar Tree, and I took the inside out, and I'm using the smaller part to act as my base. And it didn't matter to me that little heart was on the front because I knew I was going to be covering that up with some ribbon anyway. So I got started by adding floral foam to the center of the little box first. My camera battery died right when I was gluing this ribbon on, but you get the idea. I'm using the heart side of the box as the back side of my box, so that's where I put the hot glue. And then I just wrapped the ribbon the whole way around and then hot glued in the back again. Then to decorate the front of the box up a little bit, I'm just using some pieces of greenery that I had around in my stash and some little pine cones, and I think I might have threw a little snowball in there. However you want to decorate the front is up to you. I created a little tree topper using this red gingham ribbon from the Dollar Tree, and I just looped it around several times and cut some tails, and then I used one of these gold glitter wooden star stickers that they also sell at the Dollar Tree. And I left the tails of my ribbon pretty long because I wanted them to kind of cascade down the sides of the Christmas tree. And because, like I said before, the way the bag was shaped, I had to kind of cut a flat top on this tree. So having this little ribbon at the top really kind of hid the fact that it didn't come to a point. Before I added my tree to my box, I added a bunch of hot glue to the top of that floral foam, and I used some of this faux snow just kind of as a base layer to cover up the floral foam. And then I kind of decorated the base a little bit with some extra greenery that I had on hand and a few more of those pine cones, and I think even a few more snowballs. I just kind of went to town with whatever little scraps of greenery and stuff that I had on hand. Okay, so for the last project, I found 3 of these wooden bells from the Dollar Tree, but you can see they're pretty rough on the edges. So I did take some sandpaper to them a little bit to try to smooth out a little bit of that roughness, but I couldn't get it totally smooth, which was fine. I don't mind having a little bit of that rustic look. After I had the bells smoothed out, I gave them 2 coats of the crimson color by Waverly. Now, I kind of went back and forth because the edges were so rough on these bells. I was thinking maybe I should distress them a little bit, but I really wanted just a solid color bell. So in the end, I decided just to stick with the 2 coats of paint, and I actually really like how it turned out. It was neat because there was so much texture from how rough the edges of the bell was. It almost gave it a distressed look, but it wasn't. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I really like how they turned out. I wanted to create little scrappy bows for the top of each of my bells, so I took 3 ribbons out of my stash. I have this candy cane ribbon, and then I have some sheer red ribbon and some little red and white gingham ribbon. And I started by cutting 2 pieces of each ribbon at 4 inches, and I dovetailed all of the ends. And then I just had to lay all the ribbons down kind of in an X pattern. And I gathered up the center with some silver ribbon and tied it. That way it kind of gave it less of a more traditional bow look, and it really kind of gave it that scrappy look, which I really like. As I was gluing my bows onto my bells, I had to keep in mind that I knew I was going to be staggering out these bells and kind of tilting them in different directions. So the first one, I kind of glued the bow off to the left side, and then the second one, I glued it directly in the center. And then for the third one, I glued it kind of offset to the right side. To create the hanging piece that I was going to glue my bells onto, I had this furry ribbon in my stash, but you could also use one of the car wash cloths from the Dollar Tree. So I started by laying out my ribbon, and I kind of preset my bells down just to get an idea of how long I needed my ribbon to be. Now, I decided to double up my ribbon because I've made hanging banners like this before, and sometimes when you just use ribbon, it can get kind of flimsy and they kind of flop all over the place. And it turns out I really didn't have much ribbon left on this roll, and it was actually the perfect amount for me to be able to double it up. To make this hanging ribbon a little bit more sturdy, I decided to use some of these giant craft sticks that I get at Walmart, and I just hot glued 2 of them down in between the 2 ribbons. That way it gave it a lot more sturdiness, so that as I hung it up on my wall, it didn't like twist and turn. It stayed nice and flat up against my wall. And I forgot to show it, but I did dovetail the one end of the ribbons, and then after I had folded it over and glued it into place, I did eventually go back and dovetail the other side of the ribbons as well. I wanted to create little plaques for the front of my jingle bells, so I'm using these giant craft sticks again from Walmart, and I cut them down to size so that they would fit on the front of each bell. And then, so they didn't look so harsh, I used my sanding block just to round out the corners a little bit. I gave each of the pieces of wood 1 quick coat of the plaster color by Waverly, and then I used my Sharpie paint pen just to make a little dot in each of the corners so that it would look a little bit kind of like it was nailed onto the bell. Then I used my Cricut to cut out the words Jingle Bell Rock, and I added 1 word to each of the plaques. As always, if you don't have a Cricut, you could just use some letter stickers, or you could even hand letter whatever words you choose to put on your signs. When I glued the signs to the front of my bells, I had to make sure that I kept them in the right order, because like I said before, when I glued the bows on, I knew I was going to be tilting them and spacing them out in a certain way. So for Jingle, I made sure that it was on the bell that had the bow on the left side, and I tilted it to the left. And then for Belle, I glued that onto the bell that had the bow in the center, and I kept it horizontal. And then for Rock, I did the opposite of Jingle. I just kind of tilted it to the right. I laid my bells out on my ribbon before I started hot gluing them down. So I glued the one bell that said Belle on it in the center first. That way it kind of gave me a guide as to how I needed to space out the other two. And then you can see that I tilted the Rock to the right and I tilted the Jingle to the left. To dress this up just a little bit more, I took some of these really large Jingle bells from the Dollar Tree and I hot glued one to the top and one to the bottom. Now, because I hot glued these on, it made the ringer on the inside stick to the base of the bell, so they don't actually ring. So if you want your bells to ring, I would suggest probably sewing these bells on. Then to add a little bit of green to this, because I had a lot of red and white going on but no green, so I added a little greenery and some pine cones to the two Jingle bells, and then I just added in a little bit of a softer greenery with some snowballs to each of the bows on the wooden bells. You'll have to let me know in the comments which of these was your favorite. I always love hearing from you and getting your feedback. And also let me know, are you using the traditional red and white and green colors to decorate this year, or are you doing something different? All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, do all the things. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.